Dive into the pulse of Bills football with Turf to Tape, where veteran sideline reporters Sal Capaccio and film room guru Erik Turner deliver a one-of-a-kind podcast experience, combining Sal's unparalleled access to players and coaches with Erik's razor-sharp film breakdowns. The show bridges the gap between casual fans and hardcore enthusiasts. This is Turf to Tape.
This is Turf to Tape, presented by Thin Man Brewery. I'm your host, Erik Turner, and as always, joined by my man, Sal Capaccio from WGR. Sal, happy Sunday, brother.
Yeah, happy Sunday. You know, we got really teased with this warm weather, 70 degrees basically on Saturday.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's back in the 40s. I think, excuse me, it's going to snow again later this week here in Buffalo. So we'll take it as we can get it. Starts to make you feel a little bit like spring is around the corner, summer, and all that. And obviously free agency, everything happening very, very quickly in the NFL.
Yeah, the weather change has been nice. At the same time, I hate this part of the season when it starts to thaw out a little bit because I have two active service dogs and they leave a lot of mess around the yard. So yeah, it was one of those, this transition into spring is tough, man.
I know. We just got a Great Pyrenees Mountain Dog.
Oh yeah.
6 months, not even like 6 months ago. And same thing, because it was snowing and you can't go out there. And I'm like, I am dreading when this melts. And it did. I don't mean to be like disgusting or anything, but I mean, it was like garbage bags, heavy garbage bags when you're all said and done. And like, oh my God, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. And so I do appreciate it thawing out a little bit, but also, freezing over a little bit one of these mornings so that I could do it a little totally easier, a little cleaner, right?
100%, man. I love it.
But yeah, that's what comes with owning dogs. And so today we want to focus on a few different things. Obviously, free agency is right around the corner. We've been discussing some of those things when it comes to, who's available, what holes the Bills have to fill. So we're going to talk about that later in the show, but we want to start off with some of the in-house stuff, some of the transactions that the Bills have undergone with the new coaching staff, some of the scheme stuff coming through. And so let's start off there. Let's start off with the, recent releases, starting off with Taylor Rapp. Give us your thoughts on that, the numbers game, and maybe why they, got rid of Taylor Rapp.
Yeah, listen, I mean, saving over $3 million against the cap is always something you have to investigate at this time of year when you're cash strapped. But now you have a player here who really, his time in Buffalo was really kind of marked by injuries, especially, last year in and out of the lineup. And then once he was out of the lineup, let's be honest, the safety position improved, right? Yeah. And maybe that was because Taylor Rapp was playing injured. I'm not saying because Taylor Rapp was terrible. I know that people will have that opinion on that, but I felt Jordan Poyer really stabilized the safety position. He really helped Cole Bishop, obviously, and we've talked about that throughout the year. So it just felt like Taylor Rapp wasn't quite the partner for Cole Bishop they needed. On top of the injuries he's had, on top of the salary, this just became more of a, look, it's way better to move on from him, bring somebody else in. But they do have a hole at safety to figure out. That could be Jordan Hancock. We don't know what Jim Leonard feels about Jordan Hancock. That's a name we haven't talked about. But when it comes to Taylor Rapp, to me, it always felt like there were two guys that I've been consistent on that said from the beginning, the easiest two guys you think could be moved off the roster for salary cap purposes, Taylor Rapp and Curtis Samuel. Both of those were part of the releases.
Yeah, Taylor, when he was on the field, I didn't think he was a very good pairing with Cole Bishop. I thought he was a balanced guy that could play somewhat that, Poyer role that they're after moving on from Jordan, that enforcer, that high IQ, that communicator. He did some of those things, but some of that enforcing that he did also was inflicted on some of his own guys at times, unfortunately. And so I didn't think the pairing was a good balance, especially when you wanted to kind of weaponize Cole Bishop. I think that's something that we're going to start talking about a little more under Jim Leonard, and weaponizing Bishop all over the field and really building around him in that secondary and the coverages and the run fits. And so I don't think it was a good pairing. Another guy that Bills fans do know about and are familiar with, Dane Jackson. Not a big story with him. He's been kind of in and out on the Bills roster over the years. But talk about what they say with him. And then again, maybe what we're looking at going forward, because that corner position, yes, at the top, when we're talking starters, we have some good guys locked in, but when it comes to depth, they're going to be hurting this year. They're going to have to fill it back through the draft and through free agency.
So when Dane Jackson was a part of the releases and the name that came out, there was some reaction from people who said, wait a minute, I didn't think he was actually still on the roster, right? Because he was on the practice squad last year. He'd had elevations, and then you figure, okay, well, that ends. Here's what happened. When the season ended last year, because the Bills had a bunch of injuries and Max Harrison was still out, they could only get 2 elevations for the playoffs for each game. Because of that, they needed more than 2. They signed Dane Jackson to the 53-man roster. He got a contract, but that contract then is for 1 year for 2026, which is this year. So he's under contract at the end of the year. So now, since he's under contract at a minimum salary for his, veteran years he's in the league, that's what he was counting against the cap, $1.2 million. So the Bills actually saved $1.2 million against the cap by releasing him, even though many people didn't even realize he was on the team. So it does help in that regard. Now, I'll be honest with you, Erik, $1.2 million when you're talking top 51 is right around the cut line anyway. Yeah. Top 51 is only the top 51 salary cap hits count during the offseason. So you're really not saving a ton on the top 51, but it is $1.2 million overall. And you go forward, and then Dane Jackson. I feel bad that Dane's career in Buffalo, I guess, assuming his career is over in Buffalo and he doesn't come back in some capacity, ended the way it ended, which is on that throw, obviously, in Denver when he came in, because I think Dane Jackson has been a steady floor guy in his career. He's never been this really high ceiling guy where you're going to rely on him to make all these great plays. But, the guy came to Buffalo as a 7th round pick in 2020. When you are a 7th round pick and you spend 4 years in an organization, that's a good 7th round pick, right? I mean, like, you get a full 4 years. That's longer than an average career out of a guy. And he came in, and actually his first year, he actually winds up starting a couple of games, and then he becomes an actual regular on the team, and he actually wound up starting almost a full season, basically, a couple of years later. So, look, I'm not here to tell you that, Dane Jackson is some big loss, but I will tell you that I have a lot of respect for what Dane Jackson's been able to accomplish in this league coming in as a 7th round pick out of Pitt.
Yeah, he's definitely, outplayed his draft slot. He's been a steady veteran among several teams. I think the big thing for the regime going forward is that he doesn't fit what they're going to probably do in the secondary. I think that is kind of what supersedes everything. But overall, he's had a very good career and one that he should hang his hat on and be proud of. But let's talk about Curtis Samuel. He was obviously released as well. How much are the Bills saving by letting him hit the road and as far as his contract goes?
Yeah, so over $6 million now. This one was kind of, to me, okay, they're going to do this, and they're going to take a little bit of a dead cap hit, not a ton. $6 million saved on a guy that, let's be honest, when he came in 2 years ago, you thought, okay, Joe Brady had worked with him. We can get to DJ Moore because it's kind of similar in that regard, but he worked with him. He had some success with him, but it never really hurt. It never really hit. And then, remember, the end of his first year in Buffalo, at the end of the 24 season, makes a couple of plays. He makes one against Kansas City. They makes one in the playoffs against the Broncos, right? That was a really big play he made down the sideline. And that kind of showed you what he could be. That season, remember, he had a toe injury early on in Pittsburgh is when he hurt his toe. So he missed a bunch of time. Then he comes back. And then this past year, again, right away, has some bumps and bruises. He's banged up. I think there's a shoulder in there. There's a foot in there. There's all different kinds of things going on here. And it just never felt like Curtis Samuel was available. And as you know, Erik, your best ability is your availability. And it never felt like he was available enough. And I think the Bills just felt that they needed somebody who was more reliable, more available. And oh, by the way, saving $6 million on a team that needs to save some money, it just seemed like this was always going to happen.
I thought when they first brought him on that he was going to be a good value, a good piece, and have a very good role in the Bills offense. He was supposed to be that guy that was the ability to have the manufactured touches, kind of that curveball to Shakir being in the slot all the time, that vertical stretch element, that guy that could beat man coverage because of his speed. A lot of the same type of things that the Bills are still currently looking for, or prior, especially to the trade of DJ Moore, which we'll get to here in a second. But I thought at the time that he could carve out a really nice role for the Bills with Josh Allen, but unfortunately it didn't work out. But one guy that had carved out a role from day one at one Bills drive was Taron Johnson. And this was probably the hardest hit, guy that the Bills have had to release, since the Poyers and the Mitch Morses and Micah Hydes, obviously, because Taron Johnson was a foundational cornerstone player for the Bills for many years. So talk about what the Bills save, if anything, from releasing Taron Johnson.
They save a little bit. They save about a little less than $2 million. They save less than $2 million. They have to take on close to a $9 million cap hit by releasing Taron Johnson. Okay, so this is a player that I think we all recognize didn't have the same year as he's had in the years past, right? He wasn't the same player. It's also a guy that's only, quote unquote, 30 years old, still has some years left, I think, can still put in time in this league. This, to me, was less about Taron Johnson, the player, Erik, than it is about Jim Leonard's scheme. Listening to Brandon Beane, he kind of gave you the clue. If you listen to what he said at the combine, he basically said, look, Taron played close to 90% of the snaps last year. Jim's defense is going to be different. And knowing that salary and where he is, they're not going to be using the nickel as much. He didn't say it quite like that, but you could definitely feel they're not going to be using the nickel. It's going to be more linebackers on the field. So now you have a choice to make, Erik, which is you have this good player who's put in a lot of time, but he's making a lot of money, but he's not going to play as much for you. So what do? Well, there was a little bit of talk, and they opened the door to maybe him switching positions. Right. I never thought that would happen, and as we talked about. But the fact that Brandon Beane didn't shut the door on it, we had to talk about it a little bit. Never felt like he was going to be really suited to play safety. So you have this player on your team sitting there who's put all this time in your organization that just doesn't play the role for your defense or on the field as much. So I think at the end of the day, I think it was better for both parties to say, you know what? He'll have more opportunity to play elsewhere, and he deserves that. And the Bills, the decision they had to make was, do we make this a cut now and say we're only going to save $2 million right now? Or do we make it a June 1st cut and save $8 million, but we don't get that money until June 1st? The Bills needed the money now. They decided to do it now. And by doing it now, they'll eat the entire dead cap hit instead of spreading the cap hit over 2 years, which they would have some next year if they waited to make it a June 1st cut, but they didn't do that. So they'll take it all now, even though it's less money.
I agree with you from a sense that Taron probably didn't have the year that he's had in prior years last year. I also think he was used differently. He was not the Taron Johnson we knew. He was doing two things. He was making splash plays in and around the line of scrimmage. He was that third linebacker on the field, in quotes, the third linebacker on the field. He could be an enforcer in the box, kind of what Aaron Rodgers talked about in the Pat McAfee show. He could do a little bit of everything. I don't think we saw those plays as often last year because he wasn't in the box as often. He only was in the box like 91 snaps last year, as opposed to twice that in prior years. And so I think his role was a little different. I think they were trying to, in many ways, extend the life of his role and use him more in coverage and not, really induce injuries because they're asking him to play that way. But I think from day one, you could say he was a foundational player, a Bills blue player, fit like a running back, covered like a corner. In many ways, it's what the league is kind of like moving to now with the hybrid safety, nickels, where they can be in the box and stop the run. They can be in coverage. And I feel like Taron and even Sean McDermott, to his credit, that's kind of where the league is going. And now that role had diminished for Taron. And like you said, I agree. The scheme fit, I think from that perspective, I don't think he can uphold a lot of the man match coverages that they're going to ask of their nickel or that safety hybrid, nickel. But I do think that he is still a very good corner in this league. And I still think he's probably going to end up on a team very quickly in the next few days, if honestly. But it was time. I think it was time, especially with the scheme. And we'll see going forward, because as we'll talk about at the end of this show, where some of these holes are, I think you just created one there. And yes, we can, have the discussion about Jordan Hancock, but it's still an unknown. He's still an unknown in this position as a whole, because as much as being talked about, maybe not using nickel as often, just comparatively speaking, and of course, Jim Leonard being on that Broncos staff, he wasn't the coordinator. The Broncos were only in base defense like 6% more than the Bills. So if they were in their 3-4 odd front versus the Bills 4-3, 6% more. So it's still going to be a nickel-based defense. No matter what they say, the league is.
Yeah.
So I think that is something to keep in mind. The nickel is still going to be really important, guys, and they're going to have to address it like we talked about in prior weeks, right, Sal? Whether it's safety, a hybrid player, they still need a nickel.
No doubt. And I know a lot of people, there's some guys in the draft that this is a draft class, so you can find one maybe. But again, you're talking about unknowns when it happens there. I mean, even Taron Johnson, it's funny. How about Cole Bishop's rookie year where, oh my God, this guy, he can't stay on the field, and he gets a lot of criticism, and he finally gets healthy, and look what he does. I'm looking back. I remember Taron Johnson had injuries his first 2 years.
Yeah.
His first 2 years, he played 11 games. He played 12 games. He missed, basically what, 6 games a year for the first 2 years. And there were people who said he's too small. He can't play this position. Then he gets healthy his third year and he just shoots like a rocket up to the top of, near the top of the league as far as his position is concerned. And, we always say development's not linear, right? You never know when you're going to get a guy that's going to come in and be able to play right away. You never know when you're going to get a guy that's going to come in. It's going to take a little time. So there's always an unknown when it comes to this particular position and when you create a hole and say, okay, who is the guy we have? I would love to see Jordan Hancock become that guy. But last year, Jordan Hancock, when he saw the field sometimes, there was still a big learning curve, and we saw that, right? So now you have a new defense coming in, and we'll see where they go with that. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I wish Taron the best of luck.
Yeah.
I'm glad you made the point of he could hook up in the next few days. So just so operationally people understand, Wednesday next week is when players on expiring contracts can sign with another team. But if you're released, like the Bills released Taron Johnson, like they released Dane Jackson, a little while ago, like we talked about, like they released Curtis Samuel. They're free agents. They can sign at any point. The Bills have they're not on expiring contracts. They're on no contracts anymore. So the guys on expiring contracts, like a David Edwards, that doesn't happen until Wednesday. But these guys now, they're released and they can sign with anybody.
Yeah, almost in a way, they're doing them a favor. Now you can go, start negotiating before that actual free agent window opens up for the rest of the league. But a couple more in-house moves. Ed Oliver and Spencer Brown. Talk about the restructures and the money that may open up for those guys.
So they both open up about $10 million each in the salary cap that they created by basically what you're doing is the way it works is those guys had base salaries at a certain level and roster bonuses at a certain level. Well, you can move base salary and or roster bonus into a signing bonus. The signing bonus, you're allowed to spread out over the life of the contract. What they did with Ed Oliver didn't have to do with Spencer. Spencer already had enough years left on his contract where you just can move it and say, we'll just spread it out over the years. But for Ed Oliver, they had to create 2 void years for him. So now you're going to actually spread out the money where you're going to account it on your books for, 4 more years, 3 more years, 4 more years, I think it is. Whereas Ed Oliver actually becomes a free agent after 2 more years, but you still have to count the money after that. So that's how a void year works. It's still, you're paying for the player under contract to you on a percentage of what you paid him based on how you structure, what the bonus is, but the player becomes a free agent earlier. But either way, it freed up a bunch of money for the Bills. It allows them to get close to being under the cap. They need to be under the cap by Wednesday. And then, of course, the DJ Moore trade has to happen to get processed. You can't even process that without having enough money to pay him. And then you can work on, restructuring the deal once that happens, which will create more space. So there's a lot of what we call roster and financial gymnastics that go along with all this stuff. But that's what they did. And I think it shows 2 things. Number one, we obviously know they believe in Spencer Brown. They just gave him a big deal last year. He's around for a while. But the other thing is, Eric, how many times did we hear people ask us, are they going to trade Ed Oliver? Yeah, that ain't happening, folks.
No.
We said it here. Like that. No. That's not something that the Bills are very interested in. But now this kind of seals it that Ed Oliver is on the Buffalo Bills roster, not only this year, but probably next year as well.
And the other flip side of that is, yes, he's committed to the roster, which means that Jim Leonard and this staff are committed to making him fit in the way they need him to. And they're not going to ask him to do a lot of the old school odd front stack and shed. Can he do that? Yes, but you're not maximizing Ed Oliver's potential if you're doing that. So they're going to build a front around Ed Oliver. That is the smart thing to do as a coach. That's what coaches get paid to do, to make the roster fit the scheme, not the other way around. So I'm excited to see what his role at Oliver is in this defense and how disruptive he can be, because a lot of what the Broncos did with Zach Allen, albeit they're different frames and size type players, I do think that they play the game a lot of the same way in creating chaos, getting up the field. And I think Jim Leonard and this staff will maximize the guy at Oliver. So a couple other smaller ones that we touched upon maybe in prior weeks, but Alec Anderson, Fedarian Mathis, Sam Franklin, those guys coming back. Start with Sam Franklin, his importance to, the special teams. And honestly, I thought that he would, if anything, follow his, previous special teams coach to Miami, I believe. But talk about Sam Franklin and what he brings to the Bills staff or Bills.
Yeah. And of course, you're talking about Chris Tabor, who's now in Miami. And he did a really good job to stabilize the Bills special teams. I got to tell you, though, I was a little, give a little excitement for Bills fans watching and listening. When I was at the Combine, I spoke with another team's special teams coordinator, and when the Bills had hired Tabor, I spoke with this guy about Tabor. He's like, oh my God, he's really good. You guys are really like him. He's tough to plan for, blah, blah, blah. So I saw him again at the combine. I go, hey, you were right about Tabor. He did a good job, stabilized it. He goes, yeah, he did a really good job. And he goes, lick it. Tabor's good. He goes, this new guy you got, Jeff Rogers, holy cow. He said, this guy is a rock star. The praise that came from another team, special teams coordinator to me when I talked about this, he's like, yeah, Tabor is really good. He did a good job. He's like, this guy is awesome. Well, you just got and even said to me, he goes, yeah, I don't really know what happened in Arizona. There were some injuries there, so really tough for him. But anyway, I love that. So to get back to your point about Sam Franklin, I think this shows that the Bills really wanted him. Jeff Rogers probably came in, looked at his roster and said, okay, please keep this guy for me, right? So the Bills go out, not only keep him, but keep him for pretty good money for a guy that's a core special teamer. Now, don't be scared too much about when you see that he signed a 3-year, $7 million contract, $5 million in the first couple of years. He is going to count close to $2 million against the cap this year, 2.6 next year. And you could think that's a lot, but the cap's going up so much, and you got to have, this is a core special teams guy who really did play a big role in a lot of what the Bills did. I get it. If people think you paid a guy like that a little too much, he's probably not going to help you on defense at all. He is trained as a safety, but that's not his role. He's not going to play safety. Right. I don't think it should be any type of thought about him being in the safety mix here. This is a guy that you say he is going to play on every single special teams that we have, and that's why he's important to us.
Yeah, he's a starter. I mean,
starter.
There are starters on special teams. He's one of them. He had 13 special teams tackles last year, which was third on the team behind Joe Andreessen with 23. Yeah. He led with 23 special teams tackles. A lot of those come in kickoff coverage, but obviously Franklin plays a lot also on the, as a gunner and whatnot on the punt team. And he actually led, Sam Franklin did, in solo tackles on special teams when it comes to that statistic, but a pretty good starter if we're talking starter for special teams, and that's not bad value when you're talking that contract. Fedarian Mathis, who played a lot of nose tackle snaps for the Bills at times last year. I think he's a good fit for this scheme. I think he can play nose tackle. I think he can play the defensive end position in their base defense, which could be a 3, could be a 4-eye, could be a 5, inside or outside the tackle, essentially. So you got to have some size. DNs in 3-4 type scheme style are typically in the bigger range. They're more like D tackle size. So they could be 280, 290, sometimes 300, a little plus. And I think Fedarian Mathis is a good fit. So I think bringing him back as a depth player, I think he has some good value, especially knows the culture in and around Buffalo.
Yeah. And what's really interesting with a player like this is it's a guy that, if the Bills didn't re-sign Fedarian Mathis and he went somewhere else, I don't think many Bills fans would think much about it, right? Like, okay, he's a guy that was on the team a little bit. What does it tell you when a guy like that gets signed pretty quickly in the offseason? It tells me that Jim Leonard looks at his roster and goes, I'm going to identify a couple of guys that I want to make sure we keep around this building. And that's one of the guys. So I'm interested in how he wants to use them, because clearly that was something that they made a priority, because you could wait and maybe you get Fedarian Mathis back after you let the dust settle for agency. Who knows what his market would be? It's not going to be that much. He didn't sign for much more than the minimum, even, I think. But that just tells me that Jim Leonard probably identified him and said, hey, I'd love to keep him in the building.
All right. The big news that dropped yesterday, and one that I don't think either of us expected.
Can I give one more, though, that we didn't touch on, because this has to happen at some point? Ryan Vandermark is a restricted free agent. Yeah. And Ryan Vandermark, in order to retain his rights, just to retain his rights as a restricted free agent, the Bills would have to give him a qualifying offer of $3.5 million. That seems pretty heavy to me for a guy who's a backup swing tackle. So doesn't mean you have to lose him. What you can do is what you did with Alec Anderson. Alec Anderson was in the exact same boat. The Bills didn't retain his rights for 3.5. They gave him 3 and guaranteed $1.5 million and said, okay, we really like him, but we can't go to that high because he's not a starter for us. I would think they'd want to do something like that with Ryan Vandermark. Now, if they don't give him a qualifying offer of 3.5 or sign him to a different deal before Wednesday at 4 p.m., he becomes a free agent.
Yeah. That's a big one too, because obviously he's a swing tackle. He's played both positions for them. Now you can argue they may have someone in the pipeline in Grable, and even Chase Lunt to an extent, but with a new offensive line coach, Pat Meyer, who knows how they feel about Vandermark. And again, that threshold of how much is he worth when you have guys in the pipeline that you've been developing over the years. So the big news yesterday, another offensive lineman, Connor McGovern brought back for the Bills, 4-year, $52 million contract with $32 million guaranteed. That's $13 million per year on average. I honestly was shocked, Sal, that they made this deal. I know they freed up some money, but I was told months ago that there was a number thrown out there from the Bills and let that McGovern camp know this is our number. This is all we can really afford for either you or David Edwards. And that Connor McGovern was going to hit the market to see, where his market would be, his value would be. And then out of nowhere, this deal happens. And I said, based on what I've heard behind the scenes, that I think Tim Graham's article with The Athletic did have some pressure on the Bills, or put a little pressure on the Bills to get this done, but also some of the, centers and teams that need centers that kind of filled some of those positions or made trades when, you're talking about Bradbury going to the Bears.
Yeah.
With that trade. So I think that did play a part, but overall, man, I did not expect Connor McGovern to be back in Buffalo, but I'm happy they did bring him back, because having a hole at center and guard in this year was not a good thing to do. And I think they were going to have to fill it in free agency regardless.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on here, right?
Yeah.
Like you, and the reason why I've gone on the radio for the last couple months and said, I just don't think they're going to be able to retain McGovern and Edwards, is because it was indicated to me that would be too tough for the Bills to do. Just too tough.
Yeah.
And when you draft a center who has the pedigree of a Cedric Van Pran Granger at Georgia, and he's in the 4th round, you draft him in the 4th round, you have him as a backup who's active pretty much every game of his career as a backup for 2 years. That's what you do. You sign, you develop, and he steps in as a starter. That's generally how the plan goes if you can't afford a guy. Same thing with Alec Anderson. So to me, it was always, okay, it's most likely Van Pran Granger, Alec Anderson, they're going to take over. That being said, I will also tell you, I know for sure, Connor McGovern loves playing in Buffalo.
Yeah.
Loves playing in Buffalo. His family loves him being in Buffalo. He never wanted to leave. The Tim Graham article that comes out says Brandon Beane, Connor McGovern never had contact. Josh Reed also reports, well, their reps met at the combine. So there could be some semantics there, right? About who's actually talking to whom. Either way, I agree with you that what does Andrew Brandt always say about deadlines? Deadline spur action, right?
Yeah.
There was a deadline coming up. Bradbury goes to Chicago. I don't think it's a coincidence that the next day McGovern resigns with the Bills, because now there's one less team in the market for a center, right? And by the way, Tyler Lindenbaum's going to get really paid now because he's like the top guy in the market. So let's add all this up, okay? You have Connor McGovern, who loves playing in Buffalo, wants to be a Buffalo Bill. The Bills, who love Connor McGovern, they love to have him, but they're cash strapped and say, we'd love to do this. They wait it out. They see where it goes. There's no rush. They understand that they have to get something done at some point if they want to and make him an offer. And all of it leads to, at the very end, hey, you know what? Free agency starts next week. Let's just get something done here. I love playing in Buffalo. Here's what I'll take. $13 million basically over the next 4 years. That said, okay, the one issue where a lot of people are like, you know what? The Bills could have handled this a little bit different, and I understand, is the void year on his contract from his original contract has already passed the date. So his contract for 2026 in the original deal is already voided. The Bills will take a $4.8 million dead cap hit on Connor McGovern next year on top of whatever his cap hit is. So even though it's 4 years, 52 mil, it's 4 years, 57 mil when you add in the void year. So you can be mad about that. I get it, but that's not that easy. People say to me, why didn't the Bills just do something earlier? Well, maybe Connor McGovern didn't want to do that. That loses leverage if you do that. If McGovern wants to if the McGovern, his agent, want to push the void date out, that just loses leverage for them. You know, they want to make sure that, hey, our guy's going to go to market here. What do you want to do? Once that happens, now you think he is going to go to market. You're not talking with the team as much. Then you finally do talk with the team, and they both say, hey, look, you know what? Let's work something out here.
It's so funny because even that void, $4 million that you're talking about, the difference between what the Bills wanted to pay or said they could afford to pay, it was a few mil. And so I think from McGovern's perspective and his camp, they were expecting to probably get 14, 16 to 17 mil AAV per year. The Bills were much lower than that, and so I think the Bills did come up, from what I'm told, without getting into specifics, the Bills did come up several million. And again, with Tim Graham's article, I do think it put pressure on the Bills because immediately they reached out and were like, hey, if anything happened, you let us know, because they're not lying. They did want to keep him. They did want to keep Connor McGovern. He's an important piece to this
100%. By the way, can I have two things about this real quick? And I'm going to interrupt you. Number one.
No, you're good.
I've heard two things that I want to kind of squash for a second. Okay. Number one, Connor McGovern's playing center.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, like, he wants to play center. There's stories about how, like, he wanted to play center in Dallas, like, or at least, he was being used as a guard, right? He comes to Buffalo as a guard. He moves to center after Mitch Morse moves on. Like, part of the reason I think he comes back to Buffalo is, like, if other teams want him to maybe play guard, no. He wants to be a center. He wants to be in Buffalo. He's going to play center. Is it possible something happens where the Bills suddenly have to shift? Sure. You never know. You never want to put an absolute on something because he is very flexible, but he's a center. He's going to play center for the Bills. Now, that being said, the second thing I want to say is that doesn't mean, I read somebody tell me that means Cedric Van Pran-Granger's a bust. Dude, he's a 4th-round pick. He's a backup. Doesn't mean he's a bust. It doesn't mean they don't like him.
Right.
But they love Connor McGovern. He's been really good for them. There's nothing wrong with having a young backup center on a rookie contract. I, however, would not be stunned if they check the trade value market for Cedric Van Pran-Granger. His path to starting is blocked now in his rookie deal.
And in this comment from Rage Dog talking about, I think it's referencing Tim Graham's article. I will say my source said that the same things that Tim Graham's article said, and obviously what Connor McGovern told Tim Graham about.
Yeah, let's remember, Tim wasn't like anonymous sources.
No,
McGovern told it
literally
to him directly.
Yes, that was the case. There were his agent and Connor had not talked to the Bills since essentially the exit interview, and that is true. That is true. That is what I was told as well. And then again, the article came out, and then there were discussions. So I'm talking like that day, that night, discussions were had. Keep us in the loop about what happens. And the other thing, when it comes to the combine, Sal, obviously the medicals are important. Testing is kind of secondary to that, but the networking, the discussion. Yeah, I know the legal tampering period isn't open, but values are set by talking and having dinner with other guys. Agents are all there. There are discussions that happen. The NFL knows this. They just kind of put out, hey, the legal tampering period starts on Monday. No, this stuff happens. And there were a lot of conversations at the combine in Indy with, the camps on both sides. And so I think I'm happy for the Bills. I'm happy for Connor McGovern, the offensive line, and how much easier this will be for a transition when you're talking about keeping the swing man at center, Connor McGovern, but also Alec Anderson now comes in the conversation as well. They brought him back. And now I believe he's paid his dues. He can play all across the offensive line. I think you slot him in at left guard where David Edwards was, and you have a competition there. But I do think that just with the guys on the roster right now, I think he wins out. He's paid his dues there. But talk about, his role and the competition that he could see at that position at left guard.
This is the first time this year that we've talked about O-line this much in the last few years because the Bills have done such a good job of building depth. And I remember a couple of years ago going, oh my God, they have last offseason, I think it was last offseason, maybe the year before that, all 10 of their offensive linemen, like 5 starters, 5 backups, were still under contract for a whole nother year. Like, it was crazy. Right. So we've never had to go through this here in Buffalo. Now we are, but now those backups have to play. And one of them's been Alec Anderson. Remember, David Edwards actually came to Buffalo as a six man before moving into guard and starting. Alec Anderson's been that guy for the last couple of years. To me, he's going to be penciled in to be starting at left guard. However, like, nothing's given to anybody here. Chase Lunt was drafted last year. Chase Lunt spent all year up until the end of the year when they put him on IR. He spent all year on the active roster, but as a healthy scratch. You know why? They never wanted to put him on waivers because they didn't want to lose him. Like, I was told they really like Chase Lunt, but they have to keep him on the roster because even though he's not going to play, if you waive him, obviously somebody could take him. And they think that he can actually win a job and be a player in this league. Doesn't mean right now. We'll see what happens. Maybe he becomes your new Alec Anderson. They've trained him at guard. They've trained him at tackle. We'll see where his best fit is when it comes time for that. So they like him a lot. Tylon Grable. He could play guard. He's mostly a tackle. Yeah. Him and Vandermark are really the competition there. But I think Alec Anderson, I wouldn't be surprised if they go out and sign another veteran who has some skin in the game and says, you know what, I'm going to go and push some of these guys.
Yeah.
Right. That's Alec Anderson at left guard. Most likely give him a little bit of competition, but also be there for the backup to center, maybe for Van Prank Granger, whatever it is. You sign somebody who's a veteran to come in and, be a presence in a locker room to say, look, we can turn to this guy. They've done that in the past with different kinds of guys. So I think Alec Anderson's probably penciled in there. The other thing I've been asked a lot lately is, do I think that they get something done with Osiris Torrance this offseason now that he's eligible for a contract extension after 3 years? Look, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd love to always lock all these guys up, but there's no rush on that either, because you can also see what kind of year Osiris Torrance has, and maybe you have a Chase Lunt who can step in for him, and instead of paying him, maybe that's how you transition. So I don't think you have to have a rush on this necessarily.
Yeah, Jason Brown, thank you for that super chat. He says Bean is already under enough pressure, especially based on his own words of the importance of protecting Josh. That's true. Too much of a risk banking on guys under traffic and or the draft. Yeah, it was a scary sight to see when you look at this roster and depth chart, especially with like we're going to in a few minutes. You have a big hole at center and a big hole at guard, and a new offensive line coach. So there was a lot of transition about to happen, and bringing back again Connor McGovern and Alec Anderson to an extent was it eased some of my worries and concerns when we're talking the continuity, like you said, that the Bills have had along the offensive line. So the other big news that we need to discuss and talk about structurally when we're talking this contract, we're talking the trade compensation, we're talking the player and where he fits in the Bills scheme. That is the Bills trading for wide receiver DJ Moore from the Chicago Bears. Talk about that trade compensation and, of course, the financials behind that for our tapped in player segment presented by Thin Man Brewery.
Okay, so when this happened, first of all, we all knew the Bills would be in the market to upgrade wide receiver. And I've always preferred the trade route rather than the draft route. Doesn't mean I don't think they can draft somebody or should draft somebody. But to me, you need the known commodity. You're trying to win a Super Bowl now. You never know what you're going to get. A draft pick could be great, but chances are it's going to take a little while. And the Bills don't have a little while anymore.
Including the free agency class was kind of weak.
Yes.
There's a couple guys near the top that the Bills likely didn't want to pay the guaranteed portion of that.
Correct.
But that free agent class, it's kind of rough.
No doubt. And you could talk about a Mike Evans and Alec Pierce or Romeo Dobbs, right? But all those guys are nice players, but they're not the top end of the free agent market and guys that you want to come in and go, oh my God, they're right away number one wide receivers. But even a DJ Moore, he's not a true number one in the sense of a Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, but he clearly goes to the top of the Bills depth chart, right? And he's a guy that they're going to use and, down the field stretching. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I thought the compensation was a little bit heavy for me when you're talking about a second round pick, a fifth round coming back for the Bills. But I also want to go back to say, look, I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth, because while the compensation seems a little high for as a second round pick, I preferred getting a guy in here who has performed. He has over 90 catches 3 times in his career. One of the biggest things we just talked about, Curtis Samuel's lack of availability. DJ Moore is the opposite of that.
100%.
DJ Moore has played all 17 games, 5 straight years. I talked with Chris Emma from the Score 1260 on the radio the other day, who said this is a guy that goes into the medical tent and can't wait to come out to get back on the field. Like, he does not miss time. He doesn't miss games. He doesn't take plays off. I know there was a viral thing, like Chris Collinsworth said something about him taking a play off here in a game. What they said, that was nothing. That was a miscommunication, whatever. So I think just fit wise like that, that's great. But to me, compensation was a little higher than I thought and would have preferred.
Yeah.
But I also think that you gotta, if you want to bring a guy in here, you got to be able to do that. And who knows? Somebody said, well, maybe they would have just released him anyway because they wanted to move on. Well, look, if they release him, all 31 teams can sign him. The other 31 teams. You trade for him, that can't be the case. So didn't love giving up a second rounder, but this is a player that I think you need a guy like this on the team. And your second round pick at this point, as much as it could turn into a really nice player, you got to have something, I think, that is tangible that you can count on this roster. And that's what DJ Moore is.
Yeah, late second round pick. I mean, that's almost third round grade territory, which is fine. And I agree. I think overall what you gave in the trade compensation on top of what you have to pay him guaranteed wise, and then guaranteeing that $15.5 million in 2028, it's a lot to take in when you're talking about the balance of that contract and the player. But the player and what the film, like we're showing here, says is that he is a very dependable player. A 5.5% career drop percentage, which is really good. We're talking low is better, lower is better. He was a boundary receiver 74% of the time, and over the course of his career, he can play the slot. You see some of these plays from the slot position. Since 2024 in the regular season and playoffs, with among wide receivers with 50 targets against man coverage, he has a 12.5% touchdowns per target rate. That's 7th overall in that 2-year span. 8 touchdowns versus man coverage over the last 2 years. That's 8th overall. And then yards per route run, it's really low, all things considered, against man coverage, which is 41st in over those 2 years. So that is worrisome. But I do think that a lot of the issues that we saw last year and even the year before had to do with a young quarterback, Caleb Williams, and not necessarily always living within the structure of the play, the game fluctuating in play speeds, too fast, too slow at times. Like this one, he threw the ball so hot, in that slot area. But you see DJ Moore, one thing he's very good at is adjusting to and reacting to passes that are, late in the play and, away from his frame. That's something he does really well. I think overall, my quick summary on him is that he has deceptive speed. There are times where you're questioning, which a lot of people do, if he's running a route 100%. But as we all know, you're not supposed to run your routes 100% all the time. You want to change up the speed, change up the pace. I think he has deceptive speed, and so much so that he gets behind defenses and DBs so easily because it doesn't look like he's covering ground. Next thing you know, he's on your toes and beyond you. And so he does a good job of using different speeds and tempos, especially on those crossing routes, which he's done really well over the years. One of the best at running those crossing routes, which is important. As we talked about a few weeks ago, when we're trying to move Shakir around more, you want someone to take those safeties, whether they're in 1 or 2 high looks, take those safeties out of the center of the field, take those safeties off the hash. So now you can run, in the intermediate and deeper areas with Shakir. I think DJ Moore can do some of that when we're talking about getting Shakir open more and really bumping guys down, kind of like what we talked about in prior years when they got Amari Cooper, is bumping guys out into proper roles and kind of muddying up the tendencies that Joe Brady has really shown us the last couple of years as the coordinator.
Yeah, and with this trade comes a financial element too that we need to talk about, which is so DJ Moore's contract as it stands right now. Let's remember, folks, okay? The Bills and the Bears cannot actually sign the paperwork to make this trade happen yet, okay? This has been agreed upon. You can't make the trade happen until 4 p.m. March 11th was when the new league year starts. Okay, so when that happens, his contract will go to the Bills. His contract, as it currently states, he is scheduled to make $24.5 million. However, when that trade happens, as soon as the Bills acquire him, they need that money. They need the space to acquire him. They need $24 million under the cap to be able to get the trade processed. However, once it processes, then they can convert, because it's now their contract, not the Bears, they can convert the base salary into a bonus, and they can lower his cap hit down to $6 million, creating $17 million. Again, it's all a bit confusing for a lot of people. I get it, but they need $24 million in room to make the trade happen on Wednesday of next week. But once that does happen, they can then create 17 more million under the cap.
Yeah, there's a lot of gymnastics to be done to make this trade, to make it fit, to make him fit. But I do think him getting back with Joe Brady, some of his best years were with Joe Brady in Carolina. I think he's the role player. I don't think he's a one, like you said. I think he's the role player they need and that they can use and move around to help others, to help the Dalton Kincaids, the Dawson Knoxes, and Shakirs kind of work the middle even more and get more space in between those safeties and linebackers so that those players can eat even more. And I think the speed element for him is definitely going to open up some coverages and help others. But I thought it was, again, if we're just talking the player, I think he's the type of player they need and have needed the last couple of years. And so it'll be exciting to see what Joe Brady does with him in the offense. And so this segment was presented by Thin Man Brewery, and Chandler Street Breweries now host Thin Man Brewery, Community Beer Works, and Smoldered Society Beer Company. They're open every Wednesday to Sunday at noon, every single day for lunch. The tap room features 2 wood-fired pizza ovens, a full food menu, and 24 draft lines. It's located at 166 Chandler Street. Follow them on Instagram at Chandler Street Breweries. A really cool facility that they have there. I can't wait till we can get out there and do a live show at Chandler Street. Again, host to Thin Man Brewery, Community Beer Works, and Smoldered Society Beer Company. Awesome company, and obviously location there is really cool setup there. Definitely get down there for lunch, taking maybe even the Sabres games, like you're going to tonight, Sal, right? It looks like a
I
really
am.
cool location. So,
Oh my
and
gosh.
good for the Sabres. I'm happy for the Sabres
Give me
as well, man.
exciting.
It's nice to hear them turning around. It's nice to have Sabres fans now happy to see what team gets put on ice, to be honest.
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, they're the best team in hockey since mid-December, which is incredible. I mean, that's amazing. It's I heard for years how they're so bad and they've lost me. I'm never going back. And I'd be like, no, as soon as they start winning, you'll be back. And that's what's happened, right? I mean, here they are again. I saw in the chat a couple people, Matt mentioned Brian Thomas Jr. The Bills should have traded for him. Don't get duped by fake accounts. There was a fake account that said that Brian Thomas Jr. and they were shopping him, and that was totally not even true. I'm not saying it's impossible that Brian Thomas Jr. can't get traded by the Jags, but totally fake account that reported that and went viral that they were looking to trade him. And I mean, it might cost more than that. I don't know if the Jags it would cost more than what DJ Moore. It's not as easy. You can't just force a team to give you a guy that you want. Sorry, folks.
All right, for this last segment, Sal, it's funny. I right before we went live, I started mapping out just a depth chart because in order to get to free agency, hey, who should they bring in before you get to the draft? Hey, what holes are there? You need to look at the depth chart and the roster. And I know we talked about a lot of these guys. When I started mapping it out, it kind of worried me a little bit more than I had in the last few months. So let's look at the roster, the depth chart, and where some of these major holes are when we're talking the roster overall, and we're talking scheme fits. So let's start for me at edge because Michael Hoyt, I love him. He was a guy I tagged as a guy that the Bills should target in free agency last year. When he played, he was a difference maker, and they could build around him. Obviously, he's coming off a major injury, but I say edge is a pretty big concern for me because, one, we don't know where he's going to be at after his Achilles injury.
Yep.
But two, with the scheme change, I think they have Greg Rousseau as an outside linebacker edge player, but I don't think they have a rush, speed, athleticism guy to kind of complement the pass rush more so than the run defense on that side of the ball.
Still an area they're going to have to improve, and that's been the story for the last several years. I do think it's interesting that unprompted, Brandon Beane brought up Javon Solomon at the combine because he said they felt he was actually more of a 3-4 defensive end when they drafted him, but they liked his skill set. So he might actually fit into this defense better than people think. And then Landon Jackson, we didn't really get to see much from him last year. And what we saw really wasn't exactly what you're describing they need, obviously. He's not a speed rusher. He's more of an edge setter, but that's a guy that we'll see how he looked coming off the injury as well.
And so DNs, if we're talking, again, base defense, you basically two defensive ends, a nose tackle, then two edges, outside linebackers, 5-man surface. I think Ed Oliver fits perfectly as a D end in this scheme. I think TJ Sanders can as well, but if we're talking strong side defensive end, lining up to the strength of the formation, you have to be usually bigger guys like TJ Sanders being more of a D tackle. I don't know about his anchor. If he can anchor, if he can kind of stack and shed in two gap in many ways, it's not really what he was drafted to do. Now, they also used him at base D end and even fronts last year because of injuries. But where do you stand on the D ends here? Ed Oliver, guys like TJ Sanders, Fedarian Mathis can play in there. Deion Walker, I think, can bump to D end in 3-4 odd front looks. What are your thoughts on the D ends and if they need to add there? And if so, what type of players are you looking for?
Yeah, for sure. I do think, it's, they got to add a little bit because AJ Epinesa is a free agent. Joey Bosa is a free agent. We don't know about Michael Hoyt, like you said, his injury. So for sure. And I am interested to see. Now, I will say, and I believe that Jim Leonard's scheme itself will help the pass rush. Like, it's not just the players. I think what he's going to do in his scheme and how he's going to be able to kind of come with different kinds of pressures from different places, that will mitigate some of, we need this particular guy. I think he's going to create it on his own through his brain, through his scheming.
Yeah, that's a great point and should not be lost at all because I think that's one of the strengths of his scheme is the ability to send 4 or send 5, but which ones are coming. That's what is one of the built-in schematic advantages of going to an odd front that he's typically played. And so, yeah, I do think that is going to be interesting to see if they bring in a couple more. Again, DNs, you got to think about it differently in base defense, 3-4. DNs are built bigger in this scheme. And I know Ed Oliver doesn't fit that, but again, he's going to be playing that weekend and in the 3, which is, just outside the shoulder of the guard. But the big hole on the defensive side of the ball, we touched upon it earlier, is it nickel. They let Taron Johnson hit the market now. They send him to the street. Maybe that's Jordan Hancock I don't know, man. Like I said, I think nickel's still going to be essentially the defense that's the personnel group and that's on the field the most.
Mhm.
I think there's a big hole there, which is why I labeled it that a starter is needed. But at the very least, they need to bring someone in to compete with Jordan Hancock. But I think they need a legit starter, someone to help that, again, be that intermediary between the linebacker level, that second level, and the safety level.
Yeah, not only they move on from Taron Johnson, but Cam Lewis is a free agent too. And Cam's been a nice player for them who's filled this role sometimes for them, right? And he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's tough, and we know that. And we'll see what his future holds. It would be in a perfect world. I think Jordan Hancock winning that job would be great, right? But they can't, we don't know. We'll find out like they think about it, who they want to bring in, and how that looks, with linebackers and nickel corners and where they fit and placement. But that's definitely an area I think they're going to concentrate on here in this draft.
All right, corner as well,
and free agency, I should say.
Yeah, of course. The Bills starting corners, I like them. Christian Benford, Max Harrison, very good. But after that, I mean, you don't really have a true number 3. You don't have someone that you can, bring in my opinion, that can be a starter for a few games. And then you just need depth. I mean, you see it. I have several of those boxes at corner that need competition, that need people brought in. So talk about the corner position, because again, starters are great, but we know you got to have multiple corners in this league because of injuries.
Yeah. So the Bills still, are unsure of, Dorian Strong's future. Dorian Strong had neck surgery, and he posted some stuff that he believes he's going to play, but how can you count on that? You don't know that that's going to be the case. So if Dorian Strong is unable to come back, or if they're unsure about that, they're still going to have another plan. The guy that's super intriguing to me is Tre'Davious White. Tre'Davious White had a resurgence last year, did a nice year last year.
Yeah.
You can't pay him $6 million again to be back on the Buffalo Bills. It was 6 up to 8. And he wants to be in Buffalo. He loves Buffalo. So it wouldn't stun me if Tre'Davious White is back, but you got to be able to get a bit of a lower number. And I'd be comfortable with Tre'Davious White being a backup to Max Harrison and being able to start if Max were to miss time once again. Dorian Strong, like you said, how do you know what's going to happen with him? And I do want to remind everybody they did sign Daryl Porter Jr. last year as well at the end of the year. And we'll see if they feel that he can, maybe provide a little bit of depth to Corey Couch, the guy that's been on the team a couple of years, practice squad, basically kind of guy. So they're going to probably have to dip in, and you always draft corners anyway, young corners. You always sign 1 or 2 in free agency. They're going to add to this group.
Yeah. And then finally, obviously, I think safety probably pound for pound is the biggest hole in that secondary. I do think they have to draft one, and maybe even bring one in free agency, because you want to set the floor, going into the draft. And I think they have to bring a safety in from free agency. Not an expensive one. I do think they're going to look at that and say, you know what, because the safety market in free agency, it's wonky. Some years these guys get huge contracts. Some years they don't. So what are your thoughts on safety as far as the defensive side of the ball, and how they need to address it, or should at least address it?
I'm glad you have Wande Owens on there. He's actually an intriguing guy. He was really a very athletic guy in college.
Athletic, yeah.
Right? Really athletic. And excuse me, he got hurt during training camp last year. And I'm not saying that Wande Owens could necessarily even compete to be a starter, but I do think that he's an intriguing guy in this particular defense to provide a little bit of depth for you. But you're going to have to find a starter opposite Cole Bishop. We know what Jordan Poyer meant to this team last year without having Taylor Rapp out there. They moved on from Taylor Rapp. We'll see if Jordan Hancock can play that role, the nickel role, where they want to put him. Remember, they brought in Darnell Savage at the end of the year last year. Yeah. That's a guy you could also take a look at. I do think in free agency, there's a guy that played for Jim Leonard and PJ Locke that we've seen the last couple of years intercept Josh Allen both in each playoff game. I think it was over the last 2 years. Yeah. Maybe that's a guy they look at. We didn't touch on linebacker. I still think Leo Chanel, another guy that played for Jim Leonard at Wisconsin, could be a guy they target, because are we sure that they're, planning on Dorian Williams maybe starting next to Terrell Bernard? I'm not. I'm sure you're not. You don't know what that looks like. Dorian Williams, a nice player, but is he a 17-game starter at inside linebacker? I think Leo Chanel should be on the radar. I think another linebacker should be on the radar. I'll also say, I think Joe Andreessen actually fits in this defense better than he did in the last defense, to be honest with you.
Again, if Bernard's a starter, I think you're building a defense to keep him clean as often as possible because of the schematic fronts and guys in front of him. I think Andreessen can play that role just fine. Yep. I think Dorian Williams has the length and size and demeanor to play next to Bernard. Now, that off the ball inside linebacker for that position is typically in that nature of that mold, and he's going to be exposed to gaps that are open, the stacked linebacker gaps where there's no one to protect him. I think he can do that, and I think we see that he can bump down in certain situations and be a spy, We've seen him on edge. We've seen him rush the quarterback. So I think he's got some of these skills and traits that the off the ball linebackers inside for this scheme have had. But I think future wise, they are going to look to a guy like Leo Chenal or guys in the draft that they have already met with to kind of signify and show you what they're looking for that off the ball linebacker position, that versatility, the ability to play off the ball, but also on the edge and pass rush situations. So I love the linebacker position. For me, is one of my favorite to scout, and, you know, hearing and seeing some of these guys that they're showing interest in. And then of course, studying this game, it's very exciting for me on that side of the ball. So with that said, let's flip the script, go to offense real quick before we get out of here. The quarterback position. Talk about the quarterback position right now. We're talking backup quarterback. Shane Buechele is listed there. Is that someone that the Bills are comfortable with at sending into the game behind Josh Allen if something happens to QB1?
It's a good question. I will tell you this. Brandon Beane thinks very highly of Shane Buechele, his toughness, his moxie. I think the question is, could he actually go in and win football games for you, right? And they'd have to figure that out. And I don't know, but he's been behind Patrick Mahomes. He's been behind Josh Allen. He's been under Andy Reid. And, you know, he's had good coaching. He's a guy that, remember last year, the preseason, had that great game in Tampa in the preseason. So at this point, that might be the guy they have to roll with, because Mitch Trubisky's a free agent. He might get a nice contract to go compete somewhere, actually, and be a legitimate number 2 that can actually take over the number 1 spot. Maybe the Jets, they could be on the radar for him, you know, Mitch Trubisky. You know, so it's really interesting to see. I think the Titans could be a team that, you know, with Brian Dable there, you know, and there's some obviously connections and just, you have to kind of look for those kinds of things. So I do think Shane Buechele will get a serious look at the Bills' number 2 job. I'm not sure if that ultimately winds up falling there.
All right, so wide receiver, we have DJ Moore, Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakir as the top 3. Behind them, it's kind of a wash. Keon Coleman, we're still waiting to see what he can do and bring to the table.
I'm still not convinced he's on the team in 2026.
I can't tell you otherwise. So yeah, he's in there. He needs competition regardless. The Bills need competition between, you know, Keon Coleman, Tyrell Shavers coming off injury, Mecole Hardman. I think they need to bring in a guy, you know, possibly through free agency and definitely through the draft. I mean, they should be bringing in multiple wide receivers to compete and to round out this wide receiver room. What are your thoughts on the long-term versus short-term solutions? And again, trying to open up others, not just, hey, we need to bring in this type of player, slot, boundary, but guys that complement each other so that you can move guys around.
I like having Hardman under contract now to start the year, that you can figure out what he can do for you. Return man, obviously. I think KC Concepcion would be a really nice add if the Bills, you know, were to get a guy like that, even who can also return, right? You need a guy who can return to take up, and you don't have to have 2 roster spots. If that is Hardman, you know, he's done it in this league. Shavers coming off the injury, we don't know. Gabe Davis coming off the injury is a free agent. Brandon Cook's a free agent. There's a lot of unknowns. I think they could be very much still add in free agency and the draft at wide receiver for this group. And like I said, what's going to happen with Keon Coleman? I wouldn't be stunned if he's not on the team. I mean, if he is, okay, but he's still got to show that he can be reliable. And is he your number 3, your number 4? Where does that go? I'm not really sure. A lot of questions there.
And reading the tea leaves once again, when it comes to the wide receiver position, yes, they met with a bunch of those guys at the combine, Concepcion being one of those guys, but also a guy like Antonio Williams from the Clemson Tigers. They've talked to him, and he's more of a slot guy, but he's a really good returner. And so again, they're showing you and telling you, hey, we're also looking for that guy that's, wide receiver 4 or 5 that can contribute in special teams, especially in that return game. And so I think that is one of those slots, wide receiver, is where they tried to address that. So we talked about Alec Anderson, and I do have him slotted in there as a starter with not much competition to go with him, but I do think they do bring in some competition with him. So what are your thoughts on the backup guard position and the guard position overall? We kind of touched upon it earlier, but again, I just think they need to go long-term as well. They need to start thinking long-term there.
100%. Just to restate here, I do think they'll bring in a veteran at some capacity on the offensive line. I think you could always use a guy like that to push a little bit. It's nice. I think Alec Anderson would love to start and not be the 6th man. It's his job to kind of lose maybe here, but you give him competition. You see where it goes. And now that they have locked up Connor McGovern, you're really only looking at 1 starter changing out probably in David Edwards instead of 2, which is a big deal. And when you talk about communication, and guys have been there, and it's not like Alec Anderson doesn't have experience here in playing. These are all guys who've been with them and in the system.
All right, so this is a pre-free agent Bills depth chart. And like I said, you can argue and debate, you know, competition here or there, but overall, with the Bills having that first-round pick, end of the first round, one, let me ask you, Sal, put you on the spot. One, do you think they stay there, or do you think they trade out? And if they stay, what position, given what we're looking at right now on the screen prior to free agency, again, that's the free agency is going to change a lot of things. What position you think they attack in this draft?
As it stands right now, I'm going to predict the Bills move out because they don't have a second round pick. And I think Brandon Beane would love to recoup that second round pick. And the way you do that is by moving down like they did a couple of years ago when they got Keon and Cole Bishop in the second round, right?
Yeah.
So as it stands right now, I think that's the case. If they were to stay where they are, I think you're probably looking at safety right now, maybe as the number one thing to look at that particular spot of the draft. I still would not discount wide receiver as their top pick.
Yeah, I mean, it's you can really debate either way. I do think I agree with you. I think they move out of 26 to get as many picks as possible, especially based on prior precedents set by the league when it comes to that, trading out of that spot. I do think that if we're looking at this depth chart right now, I do think that, wide receiver is definitely in play. I think safety is huge, but I think there's a lot of depth at safety. So you don't have to pull the trigger at the end of the first round. But I do think edge. I think edge is still too big of an unknown to go into the next season as far as pass rush ability. Because I think the change now is, hey, you don't need your edge guy on the line of scrimmage to just be a great balance of, hey, he can stop the run, he can stack and shed, hold the edge, and pass rush. They can be a lot of pass rush specialists more so than just run defense. Because like you said earlier, the scheme naturally having a guy in a 2-point stance outside the tackle or tight end wide alignments naturally is going to help you stop the run and set the edge and force the ball back inside. So having a guy with pass rush specialty as more of a priority can now be higher up on that list when we're talking skills and traits from that edge position. So it was fun little exercise to kind of.
I have a guy in mind. If you don't draft one, it's going to be a free agent. Played for Jim Leonard, 7.5 sacks last year. John Franklin Myers in Denver.
Yes, he's a versatile guy. D tackle, D end, and some of the base looks. Very violent player with his hands, knockback ability. He's going to cost a pretty penny, but he's a guy that, yes, played in that scheme in Denver. Several of those players are going to be already probably were discussed in the Bills front office meetings and coaching meetings. There's no doubt about that. So, Sal, Sabres game tonight. You said 6:00, right? You're going to that for a little bit.
I'll be at the Sabres game with Max tonight. So say hi if you see me out there. Sabres, let's go. I mean, you got 20 plus games here left, and let's get it home, man. As my colleague Bulldog would say, get it to the garage. Not just this game, not that the game, but get this playoff drought ended and into the garage. And of course, tomorrow, WGR Sports Radio 550. I mean, that is when the legal tampering period, as they say, opens. That's when teams can start contacting free agents at noon tomorrow. You can't sign anybody until Wednesday. So we're going to be all over it. WGR Sports Radio 550. I'll be on the Extra Point Show. I'll have my podcast with Matt Bove. It's always game day in Buffalo. So just keep it with me at Sal Sports, of course.
Thanks to everyone for joining us live. Thanks to our producer, Colin Ritchie, behind the scenes, helping us set up the show, post-production, doing a lot of the groundwork for Turf to Tape. But on behalf of Turf to Tape, presented by Thin Man Brewery, I'm Erik Turner. That's Sal Capaccio. We'll see you next week.